This is Beyond Busy. I'm Graham Alcott. I'm the author of a number of books, including the global bestseller How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I'm the founder of Think Productive. We work with some of the world's leading companies to help people get stuff done, but more importantly, to help people to make space for what matters. Beyond Busy is where I explore the often messy truths and contradictory relationships around topics like work-life balance, happiness and success, and explore with interesting people what makes them tick. In short, this is where we ask the bigger questions about work. My guest today is Lauren Currie. Lauren is a serial entrepreneur with a background in service design, and she's the CEO and founder of UpFront, an organisation helping women to tackle issues around confidence. Lauren is one of the most interesting and articulate speakers on subjects of gender and race and diversity. And on this episode, we talk about the recent goings on at Basecamp, her empathy and curiosity, and what it meant to her to be awarded an OBE. There's also some really interesting insights around what it means to be busy, the importance of kindness in leadership, and Lauren shares some of her productivity secrets too. This is Lauren Currie. Lauren Currie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Graham. It's great to be here. Hi.
Shall we start at the beginning, which is, let's start with your day job or your main activity right now. So you're the founder of UpFront. Do you want to just talk about what UpFront is?
Sure. Yeah. So this is the first time since 2016 that I've had one day job. So I'm on week 4 of having one focus, which I'm very excited about. And UpFront is an organisation on a mission to change confidence, not women. And we were founded in 2016. And we do work with women all over the world to change their relationship with confidence. And we do that in 3 ways. One is through bonds. So bond is the collective noun for a group of women. We have a 6-week online course, which is our flagship product, and cohorts of bonds go through that program. So the 4th bond starts in a couple of weeks. We also have a membership space, which is the global community bond for women who are really intentionally looking to build new muscles of confidence, visibility, advocacy, and content. So we run newsletters, we do keynotes, we talk on podcasts to smart people like you, and that's UpFront.
Nice. And you said there at the beginning something which I think is really important. You're here to change confidence, not women. Do you want to just unpack that a little bit?
I'd love to, because I think it's one of the things that makes UpFront very different from the majority of kind of products and services that exist in the world around confidence that are aimed particularly at women and minority groups. Because most of those products, you know, you've kind of got the Tony Robbins, Gary Vee, which is very kind of masculine, American, privileged, extroverted version of confidence. Then you've got the kind of Royal Academy School of Drama, breath and body work group of products, which is valid, but I think quite out of reach for a lot of people. And the ones that do work with women specifically are often built to put the onus on the women to change, and they are built in a way that is putting the woman as the maker of her own fate, whereas the reality is that a lack of consequence, a lack of confidence, self-doubt, feeling like an imposter, all these things that are now becoming trendy, those are very natural consequences of not fitting the white, masculine, extroverted version of confidence we've all been conditioned to believe is the only right way to show up in a confident way. So our onus is on changing the systems, creating new spaces and new systems that embrace a whole wide range of leadership styles, confidence styles. You know, we talk about building a confidence revolution. I want to have worked with a million women by 2023. That's our new goal. And the demand is high. We have hundreds of women come through each bond cohort, and it really does, for many of them, it's the first time in their life where they've been introduced to the notion of intersectional feminism and privilege, and understanding the huge role that race and class and gender and economic background and all these things, how they affect who gets to show up in what spaces in what way.
Yeah. And if someone was going to go through that program, so it strikes me that there's the bond element of it is this sense of community and being able to explore some of these things and express these things with a group of like-minded people. But then presumably there's almost like a sort of ideology or a kind of content sort of focus too, right? So just describe what that would look like to someone if they were going to go through one of the bonds that you do.
Yeah, so the kind of principles of the bond space is, first of all, one of high psychological safety and high trust. So, as you know, I've worked as a designer and a facilitator and worked in and around culture and leadership for a lot of years. So, I've put all those skills into practice to create a community that feels safe very quickly, albeit it's online and often, well, most of the time it's strangers and people who don't know each other.
Yeah.
And, often the feedback we get is that you have conversations in the bond that you couldn't have in your professional environment, even if that was a good, positive professional environment, just because a lot of these things are taboo, whether that's around your relation, fertility, money, and aging, a lot of things that really do impact women's confidence, where it's not really the norm to have conversations about that stuff. And then similarly, conversations that you wouldn't really have with family or friends, because for a whole bunch of different reasons. So there's one principle of high safety and high trust, and the other one is that no woman experiences the world and experiences oppression in the same way. So we do a lot of work to help you look outside of your own lived experience of your gender and your race, and really do work to understand what that experience might look like and feel like for other women who are showing up with the same challenges and blockers as you, but have got their, the kind of experience of them becoming true for them have been very different. And then the third piece is that we don't put any emphasis on professional identity. And what that means is, in any given space, we have CEOs, stay-at-home mums, unemployed people, students, team leaders, and everything in between, kind of rubbing shoulders with each other in the same bond, and again showing up with the same challenges and blockers. So there's an immense feeling of solidarity very quickly, but one that's very welcoming, because we know, for example, women who take a break from professional work to care or to have a baby or become a parent, the number one reason they cite that stops them from going back into traditional work is a lack of confidence. So, it's a very systemic, nuanced thing, and we're working hard to create bonds and spaces that really hold space for that nuance.
I love that idea that it's, people showing up as humans rather than as pay grades, and there's no hierarchy, and just the empathy that would create, right, for people who've been in a career for 20 years and haven't taken a career break for childcare versus the people who have and are just at a very different point. You were saying something before about how a lot of issues with confidence are the structural realities then manifesting, and the kind of, they manifest as these issues that bring about a lack of confidence, and it's like it's as much down to the systems as it is down to the people. And so I wonder, it feels like it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? Because when you think about your sort of previous work, and I wanted to talk about Snook in a minute as well, but you spent all of this time designing systems, and now you're spending a lot of time helping people to navigate themselves through those systems. So how do you ever get to the point where you're trying to work with people, but actually in the back of your mind is like, this whole system is screwed, so why are we even trying to change people's approach, because actually the system is the bigger issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very real tension, and my point of view is there's no place of neutrality in that. You're either actively upholding a system, or you're actively breaking down a system to create a new one. And where UpFront sits in that is, first of all, one of the most powerful jobs to be done is to inform and educate women as to why they feel these feelings. They get the feedback to speak up, to put yourself out there more. They get rejected for the promotion even though they keep asking for it. These constant feelings like they don't belong, that they're going to be found out. Whatever these symptoms might look like, is helping them understand that that is not a problem that lies with them. That is not anything that they have created, or actually they as an individual have the power to fix, in inverted commas. And that in itself is hugely liberating for lots of the women that we work with. And it reminds me of that phrase, the truth will piss you off and then it will set you free. I think there's a lot of women who move through the world absorbing these messages that you're responsible for your fate, you're responsible for your career, and you need to learn to work harder, to meditate more, to ask for help, to be more resilient, whatever it might be. And of course there are lots and lots of things that as an individual you can do to increase your agency, and the pieces of that we focus on are the pieces that are linked to privilege and power, particularly for white women and able-bodied women, cis women who have more power in these spaces than their black or brown peers do. And that's when I think, it's not, I get cross at these kind of clickbaity BuzzFeed headlines of, there's no point in even having a conversation, stop telling women anything because the system needs to be fixed. And it's like, the system is made up of women. People are what make the system. And right now, the women that are coming through these bonds, in the next 2, 5, 10 years, they're recruiting people, they're building companies, they're creating more wealth. And when you start to do that with awareness and an education and intentionality around how do we break these toxic norms that we have around confidence needs to look like being the loudest voice in the room, that's how those norms get broken. And I fully believe that it's possible. Let's
just do some positive dreaming for a minute. So what does a good future of work look like for you? If you think about big vision off the back of that, because the inspiring part of that is suddenly you've got all these people that are then going to create that future. What could that look like? What do you want to see?
Gosh, what a question. Positive future of work, I think, looks like feminist in its values and practices and behaviour. It looks intersectional, genuinely diverse and inclusive and fair. I think things like universal basic income, universal basic healthcare, and then I think the other bunch of stuff is around the planet, vegan, sustainable. Yeah, for me, I'm a big believer in universal basic income, and I heard it talked about on a podcast a while ago that yes, universal basic income, but also universal basic services. So stuff like buses are free, trains are free. Like that's the way to, to really improve the economy, because what you then create is there's a sort of system where like everybody has the FU money, right? So everybody has,
just a basic level of income that if you're really unfulfilled in a job, then you get to decide to leave. You're not, you know, so worried about making the rent next month that you can't. And like, that's the thing that really inspires me, right? Is the idea that you can get to a future where people are treated with dignity and respect and fairness, but also people have the ability to do the kind of work that they really want to do and are putting their skills to good use. You know, that's the thing that really inspires me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree, and I think that brings up two things for me. Like, one is a big part of this future world where you and I have made up all the rules is childcare and infrastructure for families and children. And I know that we've talked about that before. You know, a huge reason why we've relocated away from London to be here in Sweden is they are, from a policy level, built to support women and families and parents to thrive, because all of the data that we are looking at around gender inequality and the racial inequality gap, the racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap, all comes back to women being forced to step out of the traditional workforce to either have children or care for elderly relatives. And, you know, that foundation is a game changer. In Sweden are a great example of getting that right. And then I think the other thing around the kind of FU money and people being able to do work that fulfills their purpose is a huge yes to that. And we need to also look at the women who are working the 0-hour contracts. You know, they've never had a job where they've had a desk. You know, there's no huge amount of discrimination, sexism, racism, and women who are just living incredibly precarious lives at the helm of usually male bosses and they're completely unprotected. So there's lots a lot of work to be done.
Shifting gears slightly, so let's talk about the early part of your career, which is how we first met. We were trying to figure this out when we spoke the other week, is what we were both doing in a room at NCVO. I can't actually remember, but you were doing a presentation and I think pitching for a project around leadership, but it was around service design, and it was when you were with your business partner Sarah and Snook. So that, for me, just when I remember being in the room with you guys, just being such a fan of your approach and you know, and just your approach to design thinking and service design, and just this feeling like such an interesting area to work in. So do you want to just talk about the history of Snook and the sort of part that played in your earlier career?
Yeah, so it was my first business, set it up when I was 23, from a place of total naivety. I had no idea really what.
It's the best place to set up a business from, isn't it?
Exactly. And you know, I discovered service design quite early on in my university degree. I studied product design engineering at Duncan O'Georginston Art School in Dundee, and you know, I went there on a very clear mission to be a product designer. You know, I was going to be the next Steve Jobs. I was going to make a product and get really rich and change the world. And then discovered this idea of service design. The first time I heard about it was through the lens of design against crime. So the fact that you can use design in terms of how spaces are laid out, how information is exchanged to prevent crime. And this just blew my mind, and that was my first step into service design. And you know, at that time it was a very immature field, still kind of finding its feet. I wrote my thesis on service design. I made really good friends with lots of the key thinkers and authors in the field at the time, who were super generous and kind of gave me their time and opened up the discipline for me. And then, you know, it didn't take a genius to work out all the jobs were in London, and I was extremely passionate about my local area and about where I grew up and about Scotland. So Snook, and my mum came up with the name, and my you know, my family played a huge role in our early years. You know, they built the furniture in our studio. My mum used to she made all the tarting bunting for our first studio, and really it was all of my 20s just worked my arse off, for lack of a better phrase, to really evangelize, because it was very unknown. As you say, it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of a new combination of things that have already existed. You know, this idea that we need to design complicated customer experiences with the people that they're for in mind, which now is like, oh well, yeah, but you know, even now it's still not commonplace. Even now, service design is still a booming industry, you know, 10 years on. So yeah, we built a consultancy practice, one customer to another customer, and yeah, it was my first business. I learned a huge amount, and you know, now the way I think about it is like, design is my practice and my craft. Like, design is how I solve problems, it's how I think about things, it's how I see the world. But now I use that to build other things, rather than my previous businesses were about selling that process and that skill set, or upskilling others in that process and skill set. So that's been quite a pivotal shift for me.
Are there any particular things that you look back on from that business in terms of like the work that you did, like particular changes that came about, or just stories you can tell about how that design-led thinking really changed stuff?
I mean, I think looking back, I can see that we really did play a significant role in showing what was possible, and I'm really proud of the part I played in service design being what it is today. And you know, I still get emails on a weekly basis from, you know, students I met in like 2010, like on a stage somewhere talking about service design. And amazing. You know, I think that's really special.
And then we reconnected a little while ago because we were both speaking on the same virtual stage at KindFest.
Yes, that was such a lovely event.
It was amazing, wasn't it? So I wanted to talk to you about kindness. That just felt like a really obvious thing to talk to you about. So tell me what your thoughts are on why kindness is such an important thing for leadership and for business.
Yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about more and more, because kindness has got a really interesting relationship with confidence, and that part of why we need to change confidence, I believe, is the kind of stories we're told and the stories we make up around confidence is that you're either confident or you're kind. Probably not going to be both. They're not words that we often hear in the same sentence. So I've been telling stories and having conversations about what does being confidently kind look like, and this is what I talked about at KindFest. And there is, you know, people have been super receptive to this idea of, yes, of course you can be both, and how unhelpful that we're given the message that you would have to be one or the other. And I think, you know, COVID-19 has in many ways been a leadership test, and the results have been extremely negative. You know, across all sectors, we've seen that there is a leadership deficit, and I think the leaders who have shown up in the right way, in the progressive, kind way, are people like Jacinda Ardern. I saw at the weekend she got named the best leader in the world, greatest world leader, and she is somebody who leads with kindness in a very intentional, purposeful way. I think we also see it in the business world. Like one of my favourite case studies is the CEO of Timpsons, which is of course a family-owned generation business, and he talks a lot about their entire business model is built upon principles of kindness. And for me at UpFront, I'm trying to role model what that looks like in my business in the hope that others will copy me. So women who have got no income, women who are on maternity leave can join a bond at no cost. Me and my partner have just launched or recently launched a new coffee truck business in England, and there we're trialing offering people cheaper milk if they choose to try an alternative milk. And you know, I think all of these things are, it's about being kind. It's about being kind to your customers, kind to yourself, kind to the planet, and realizing that it's not about, that kindness is a weakness. And I think for my work at UpFront, the most interesting bit is the difference between being kind and being nice.
Yeah.
And you know, we know that the etymology of the word nice is around stupid and stupidity, and actually kindness, being kind, is much more about, you know, everybody has potential, believing everybody has potential, and showing up with intentionality, whereas niceness is often weaponized against particularly women and people of color as a way of forcing them to accept a status quo that isn't serving them. And I meet lots and lots of women who are being held back by conditioning around niceness, because, you know, if you grow up as a little girl, you are taught that people liking you and being nice to everybody comes first, and comes first even before yourself, and that's really harmful.
Yeah, I think so. Often kindness and niceness are just confused as one and the same. And I'd say a couple of things on that. One is, you will often hear people described as overly nice or too nice. It's very rare that you hear as a criticism someone's too kind. And if it is, it's a remark that people make, oh, you're too kind, like it's a great thing.
Yeah.
And also, like, that whole thing about niceness is all about likability first, being liked and pleasing people first, and then the purpose of what you're doing comes second. And I think kindness is the other way around. I think kindness is where you put the truth and the purpose first, and then you work out the way to deliver that in the most dignified possible way, right? So in a way, it's like, it's, for me, like, kind and nice are almost opposites rather than being two things that are very similar that get confused, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I agree, and I often have to remind myself too, it's like, I'm not building this business to be liked. In fact, if I'm doing my job properly, I'm probably going to be pissing some people off. You know, whereas I know that I will always be kind. I will at least always try to be kind, and that is a really helpful framing for me.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a bit more about what just popped into my head there is when you're saying sometimes if you're doing your job properly, you're going to annoy some people. That might be a nice segue into the Basecamp stuff, because it felt like, and we both made little interventions that week when Basecamp made its infamous blog post. And what was interesting for me is my email newsletter goes out every Sunday. I usually get 1 or 2 unsubscribes every week. And that week I had 7 unsubscribes in the first 3 hours it went out. And that email, which actually referenced your video, was basically me saying, you can't just build an organization where you say, we're going to only focus on purpose and we're not going to listen to, any more debate about race and about gender, which was really the kind of crux of what people got annoyed with that Basecamp blog post. So I just thought the way you the way you talked about Basecamp, which from someone with a design background and me with a productivity background, we've both been fans of what Basecamp do for a long time, right? But you talked about it in a way that was still, it was still reserving that kindness for them. You were also being kind to the other people whose work and reactions you'd read about it, who you were referencing, and you're pointing people back in other people's directions and not trying to say all these ideas are mine. It's like, I've read this other thing and there's this other thing that's really cool. So do you want to just talk a bit about your reaction to that Basecamp blog post, and also I'd love to know if you had did you have a backlash to that as well?
Yeah, backlash, I don't know, but I was actually really pleasantly surprised at the amount of engagement and share. Like, a lot of people shared that video that I made, and people like yourself,
Nice.
a few people putting it in their newsletters and stuff, meant that people who didn't know me found me and got use out of the video. So
Yeah.
I can't say that I notice backlash, but I definitely notice when I share posts that are visual imagery of black and brown women's faces, they get less engagement than photographs of white women's faces.
Do you mean just on Instagram and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And it's hard because, I'm, in terms of data and numbers, tiny fish in the big Instagram pool. But I think when you look at the people with, millions of followers and the much bigger platforms, we see the same patterns, especially for black and brown women themselves, having their accounts deleted, hacked, their pictures being removed. So there's definitely racist bias in the algorithms. I don't know, I don't have expertise to pull apart what's the algorithm, what's the individual follower.
Yeah, right.
But all I do know is there's definitely a problem there to be solved. And in terms of Basecamp, I mean, it actually really floored me the day that it came out. And I think, and I say that side-eyeing my whiteness and the fact that I could choose to turn it off and go do something else if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I know for a lot of the black and brown people listening, that's not a luxury that they have, especially the people who work for Basecamp. And
well, that was one of the lines in that piece that really annoyed me in Basecamp's blog post, Jason Free's blog post, because it was like he was saying, it was the framing of it was a very white framing. It was like,
100%.
we shouldn't have to be distracted by the worry of whether we are checking into this conversation or checking out of this conversation, or whether we need to intervene or be seen as complicit and all the rest of it. And that was the first thing that I thought. It's like, if you're black and you're reading that, or if you're a woman and you're reading that, if you're disabled and you're reading that, like you're reading that without the privilege of just being able to turn it off or check out, or just you have a little worry about whether it's a bit awkward. It's like it's just politics that affects your pay and your like possibility of being discriminated against and all kinds of stuff, right?
It's racist. It just fundamentally is, and it's to lead with a notion that two white men who run an organization can decide what is politics and what is not is fundamentally flawed. Running a business is political. I don't care if you make baked beans or productivity software. It is political. And by taking a stance to say we're only going to engage with the politics that are relevant, like politics, like privacy laws, for example. They wrote a book about remote work. Work is political. Where you work, how you work, people's access to work, how people get compensated for work, how decisions are made at work, all of that is political. Everything is political. And the really scary thing about it is, first of all, because of who they are, and I get that on paper they're small, like 60 employees, but they are one of the world's biggest small companies. Like, their digital footprint and their influence and their power is a much bigger scale than their actual revenue or staff numbers. So that means that they set a precedent. It means people listen to them. It means people copy them. And I guarantee there will be people right now, as we speak, who are using that as a flag to put in the ground and say, Basecamp have done it, we're going to do it too. And we probably won't read about them because They'll not be people who work in the open and want to put these things online, but they have given people permission to copy them.
Yeah.
And my hope is that these businesses will die, and they will die quickly. And for anybody who is listening thinking, well, what do I do about this? First of all, you know, your money, your power is in your pound. If you're a Basecamp customer, please choose not to be anymore. There are lots of alternative software companies that offer the same thing. And then I think the other thing is, you know, I know that article was flying around millions of Slacks and Microsoft Teams. There's lots and lots of teams having conversations about, oh, have you read this? What do you think? And, you know, I wonder how many white people stood up and said, well, what do we think about this? Yeah. What's our stance on politics? What's our stance on feeling distracted by the fact that Black people are being murdered every day, you know? And I really hope that we step up to that moment, because that's when good will come of it. I mean, of course, since we last spoke, and since I made the video and you wrote your newsletter, the majority of the leadership team have left, which is great. And the fact that they had the audacity to offer, was it 6 months pay or something? I imagine thinking that not very many people would take them up on it, and then the majority of the leadership team did. So I hope that serves as a lesson to anyone else who's watching. But really, I just felt extremely, extremely sad, just deeply sad for the people who have dedicated their life's work to teaching leaders and organisations what diversity and inclusion is, why it matters, what it looks like. And, you know, one statement from a company like them can just set that work back years. Yeah. And I feel really sad about that.
The sad thing that I felt about it, and I talked to a couple of people who work in that space after the Basecamp blog, and it seems like there's a little bit of a backlash going on right now, where lots of white people are saying, hey, we've spent a year talking about Black Lives Matter and diversity, and, you know, we're kind of bored. You know, we've had enough of that. And that's kind of what it felt like to me. Yeah. You know, just getting all those unsubscribes just way more than normal, and just being like, oh, and then, you know, I just felt really down about that. And then I had a couple of really nice, supportive, you know, email replies back in the other direction, but they sort of came through the next day, and I had like this whole evening of just feeling really down about it. And when I've spoken to other people in that space who are, you know, doing a lot of that culture work and leadership work in companies, like it seems to me that they're, you know, what they're saying is there's just a little bit less of an appetite now to have those conversations, because people have been having them for a year and they just feel tired.
Well, that's the definition of privilege, like white person feeling tired. It's like, well, yeah, because we don't know what it's like to be tired, really. When you listen to stories from people of color, you know, there's generations of exhaustion, bias, prejudice, microaggressions. So, you know, I think anybody who is feeling tired needs to really do the work to examine how the existing system has benefited them, and how their whiteness has benefited them. Yeah, and also, you know, when there are the opportunities, and in the sort of day-to-day work that we're doing, we need to also just make sure that we're not tired, right, and that we're keeping up that work and keeping up those conversations, and just mentioning these things, and, you know, and trying to change them. Yeah, I mean, you know, tired, it's probably a whole other podcast, I'm sure. Well, there is actually an amazing Instagram. I think I'm not sure exactly what structure they are, but they're called the Nap Ministry. And they create amazing content educating, particularly for people of colour, around the relationship between rest and capitalism. And
interesting.
It's something that I'm, really early stages of getting my head around and learning. But I absolutely, do I feel tired? Yes. Do I have days where I need to not work because I'm so tired? Yes. But it's understanding where that tiredness comes from and how and who to share that tiredness with in a way that is sensitive to the context and the times that we're living in. And I also see it the other way, where there's this like frantic urgency that I must be my best activist self every minute of every day, and that's an invitation to burnout and to your mental health suffering. And Sophie Walker talks about this in a really beautiful way in her book 5 Rules for Rebellion, which I love and recommend. And she talks about this idea of it's like a Ferris wheel, and on the days when you wake up and you have energy, you need to fucking go to work, and you need to go to work for the people who don't have the privileges that you have. But on the days when you're tired, you must rest, and you must rest knowing that somebody else woke up that same day with energy. And and so it keeps going round, because I meet so many amazing, brilliant women who are fighting intense, complex causes, and they are making themselves ill through the work.
Maybe that's a nice little segue to just talk about work-life balance and productivity. So for you, one of the things that really stood out in that video you did about Basecamp was, I think you said something along the lines of, I have just lost sleep for 2 nights thinking about this and whirring this around in my head. And it just strikes me that you have just a really deep, it feels like you're a deep thinker and you have a deep sense of empathy. And I bet that's a blessing and a curse for you. So I'd just love to hear more about that. Just what does that look like for you personally? And how do you try to give yourself permission to be at the bottom of the Ferris wheel sometimes and just take time away? And
yeah, I feel seen. That is an accurate description. I think I feel my feelings very deeply, and that coupled with a very powerful urgency to contribute, which I've had since I was a child, and no amount of therapy can help me pinpoint where that comes from. One day I will.
So you don't know where it comes from?
Not really.
Okay.
Because that I grew up in a very loving, sporting family environment. My parents' relationship with my academic success was one of, all we can ask for is you try your best. My mum used to put a bookmark in my book, like a few chapters along, and say, you need to put the light out when you get to this bookmark, or I would just sit up all night reading. And they would come and say, you really need to. That was when I was super young, into my teenage years. It would be like, I'm going to come and close this laptop lid now. You need to stop. And so it definitely wasn't an external pressure. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff around Catholicism. I went to a Catholic primary school and a Catholic secondary school, and I think they instill very toxic narratives around good and bad, which I think again shows up differently for different genders. But that's also a whole other conversation. But yeah, where I am is, I do feel things and I care a lot about a lot of stuff, and I've probably learned a bunch the hard way. Whilst building Snook, I ended up in hospital, had to call an ambulance, scary times, and that was all they could tell me was your stress, your body's just responding to stress.
Wow. And was that just from work? Were you just working like stupid hours? And
yeah, I just worked all the time.
And you didn't have anyone to come and close the laptop like you did when you were at home?
No, and also I was like in my mid-20s, so I had lots of energy. I didn't have any children.
Yeah.
And I also love it. You know, I really, really love my work. And that is, you know, when you talk about work-life balance, I really don't think there is such a thing. I think there's always trade-offs. There's always a sacrifice. It's definitely shifted for me. I mean, two things play a huge role in where I'm at now. One is, of course, I'm a mother, so I have a young son who's 3, and that's definitely affected my energy levels, first of all.
Yeah.
But it's also affected my, like, I don't feel able, if we think kind of pre-COVID times, like I don't feel able to get on a flight and say I'm going to go to this conference for 3 days. Like I don't want to be away from my baby for 3 days.
Yeah.
And that's new. Like that's a new thing. And the second thing is my partner, and the relationship I have with my partner and how we've designed our family life is that he is the sole, he's the primary carer, and he was doing a PhD when we decided to have a baby. He quit his PhD, and his career has suffered from that. You know, we suffer all the same things. It's just gender reversed.
Yeah.
But because of that, I'm able to work the way that I work. But I'm much like, I don't work weekends. I usually don't work evenings. I don't have email on my phone. I don't have notifications on my phone. And I really don't do stuff that I don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely at that place, which I know that's a huge theme in the bond. That's, you know, a lot of, it takes work to get to a place where you feel okay to say thank you, but no thank you.
And also that's not, it is a question of money and financial security, but it's also just not a question of money and financial security, is it? It's about how you see yourself and your level of comfort and confidence to be able to say no as well.
Totally. And it's really complicated. And you know, I always say, like, I wish for all these Forbes 30 under 30 and I made my $1 million revenue. Like, can we see your spouse's paycheck? Can we see your can we see the wealth, the net worth of your parents? Because we know, like, all of the data shows the number one thing that influences your career and success, in the inverted commas, is your parents' wealth. And I grew up in a working class family in a really poor area of Scotland. My partner is from Liverpool. You know, we don't have big trust funds and big safety nets. I am the breadwinner. I'm the sole earner in our house. And, you know, that feels, I swing between, I want to tell this story because I know it's not told enough, to, do I need to tell the story about, you know, do I need to tell the story about every aspect of this? I'm actually just going to keep my head down and go on with it. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is. Because sometimes I get met with like, oh my God, your partner's amazing and you're so lucky. And I'm like, or this is, you know, this is just very normal. And most women in the world are doing this, have done this at some stage in their life, and they don't get put on a pedestal and told that they're amazing.
Yeah. I've had it, so I'm a 50-50 single dad, and I've had it honestly about 3 times in the last week where people have said, oh, it's amazing that you do 50-50. And it's like, yeah, I have this exactly the same as you. It's like, no, it's not only is it so normal, but it's mathematically normal, right? It's like we do half the work. I mean, that shouldn't be a thing that I'm being sort of commented on because of. And empathize with the whole background thing too as a free school meals kid. But yeah, let's not get into that. I've got a couple of things I wanted to touch about before we finish. We've got about 5 minutes. So my friend asked me last night, said, "What are you doing this week?" And I said, "I'm recording a podcast." And she said, "Who's it with?" And I said, "Oh, it's with Lauren Currie." And she said, "Oh, Lauren Currie OBE." And so it strikes me as a thing that it's like, you put that on your social media handles, and it's a thing that you're deeply proud of. So I'd just love to hear about how that came about, and what does that mean to you, the OBE?
Yeah, of course. So I was nominated by a brilliant woman who actually I've met a bunch since, but hadn't met at the time, which still kind of blows my mind. So she was a civil servant, and she nominated me, and I think the process is you then get a whole bunch of different letters of nominations from different people. I don't know who wrote the letters. I've never read the letters, but I got a letter through the post to tell me that I'd been nominated for an OBE for my services to design and diversity. And I was invited to Buckingham Palace December 2017 to collect my award. At this stage I was like 9 months pregnant, so I am very round in my picture with Prince Philip, which actually I really love, because it means I can show Atlas and say, "Look, you met the Queen." And
if your waters have broken in the palace or something, do you get like special privileges, like you're allowed to get
so this is a
married
whole
in
thing.
the palace? Or is it...
Yeah, so this is a whole thing. They have paramedics on site.
Yeah.
Because you can't give birth on royal soil, or there would be...
Oh, it's the opposite, right? Okay.
There would be consequences of that. So luckily that did not happen. Privileges that come with the award: I can get married in St Paul's Cathedral. Yeah. I can carry a sword. I can herd sheep over London Bridge, or something very strange. But I have never been, and I am not a fan of the royal family. I think they are at odds with gender equality. They are at odds with racial equality. They are built upon foundations of white supremacy. But I think it is possible to hold those two things at once. And the reason that I decided to accept the award was, firstly, had I rejected it, nobody would have noticed. Like, I'm really not famous enough for that to make any sort of headline. Like, I'm not Judi Dench or Judy Blume.
Michael Sheen gave his back, didn't he, recently?
Yeah, but we all know who Michael Sheen is.
But that's my point. Yeah.
Who maybe one day I'll give mine back and people will notice. But I decided that the work that I'm doing, this, I hope, enables me to be taken seriously in spaces where I wouldn't normally be taken seriously. It enables me to get a seat round a table, and I know that I can trust myself to ask the questions and make other people around that table uncomfortable if I'm ever in that situation. And the last thing is, it made my mum and dad really, 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 really happy and proud. And my dad still gets teary when we talk about it.
Yeah.
And my dad works for a local council, and I know he's super proud of me, but could he really tell you in detail what it is I do every day? Probably not. And this means that he can go to his mates in the office at work, and everybody he meets knows what an OBE is, and it's like a really special thing for him, and that felt really important to me.
It's very easy to have high-minded sort of views against awards, and then you think about, like, if I was offered one and then I turn it down, and then I would think about my parents, like I just would feel so guilty about denying them that day.
Yeah,
but
and it's like, we're having this conversation now, and I hope that people will listen to this and they'll think about the royal family. They'll think about award. All of these things are tiny ripples. I really don't. if we take the stance that, you know, we need to be Madonna before anything we do or say makes any difference, then we're going to end up in a messy place. You know, it's like we all have agency and we all have power. And for the design community, you know, I think, as far as I'm aware, it's the first award for service design of that kind. And you know, that's a big deal for service design, if not me, like, for service design. Sure. So
we kind of share this slight nervousness about the fact that we're out there on the internet putting out useful stuff that we hope will help people. And there's a lot of people who are also out there on the internet putting out stuff and marketing themselves in ways that we really just don't like and relate to, and we don't want to be that. And we've had conversations about that before. So do you have any particular rules for how you put yourself out there online, like things that you do want to do or don't want to become? Like how do you approach that whole kind of icky world of sort of internet thought leadership and marketing and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, it's very clear to me in my head that it's my job. It's part of my job, and that means that there are boundaries. It means that there are elements that are outsourced. It means that there are parts that are strategic. You know, it's all about helping me reach more people, have more impact. I think there are practices, particularly I think from white female influencers, that keep me up at night. There's been a few recently that have made, you know, that have got significant press coverage because of the damage that they caused to vulnerable women who kind of took them at their word and ended up paying for services that weren't delivered, and women who are selling woo. So, you know, whether that's manifestation, law of attraction, crystals, tarot cards, astrology. I mean, I just think you could not make it up. It's like, just as we're making progress with gender equality, we're now being told to attribute our mood to what the moon's doing, to attribute our success to how hard we rub these two rocks together. You know, if you don't get it, it's because you didn't visualize it and want it enough. And it's like, that is a fucking insult. It's an insult to our intelligence. And it's also steeped in privilege. It is so steeped in white privilege, particularly because, you know, how are these things working out for women who are in domestic abuse situations? How are these things working out for pregnant women that have just been sacked and they've got nowhere to go and no money to buy food? Like, this narrative that I can teach you how to think things and they will happen in your life is awful. And, you know, they're selling a fake lifestyle. You know, it's this kind of, if you like me and you want my life, buy my book and buy my course. And this particular influencer, she made £1 million by selling products that she never delivered. Hundreds of women who were financially or mentally vulnerable handed over. You know, I had women get in touch with me who paid up to £5,000 and didn't get anything back. And this is,
you know, is she selling like the manifesting thing? Is that her? So it's like the principle is you put this money in and then you dream about it and then good stuff happens. Is that?
Yeah, it's like ask the universe for what you need, and the universe will.
Like The Secret. The Secret was all along those kind of lines.
So law of attraction stuff. And don't get me wrong, positive thinking, visualization, all for. There's lots of science that shows those things work. But I am not for women claiming that you can think your way to financial wealth, you can think your way to entrepreneurship, or you can imagine your way to whatever version of success you're going after. And what was so harmful about that particular case is the people who complained and questioned her were immediately blocked and labelled anti-feminist. You know, it's like very, you know, the same principles that we see people who run cults using, where it's if you speak against it, you're othered. And a huge amount of fear, because there was a lot of fear around what will the consequences for me and my business be if I speak out about this.
Isn't it interesting how there's this on the one hand you've got this idea of just think it and it will come true, and that tends to attract, you know, a predominantly female audience. And then on the other hand you've got this thing of just hustle and hustle and hustle, and don't actually worry about whether you've got a great product or whether it's benefiting people, but just like be on the treadmill for 20 hours. And that attracts a predominantly young male, you know, Gary Vee audience kind of thing, right? But both of them are just so far at the extreme that they're going to be wrong, because they don't tie together the idea that not only have you got to think, but you've got to have some logic to the work and do some work and all of that. So that's an interesting gendered...
You're right. I hadn't quite compared the two in that way. And I think one of the most toxic parts of those narratives is it's so focused on the individual. You know, it's so focused on self-progression rather than we. It's like collectively, how do we make things better? Especially for the people who aren't Instagramming about their fucking mood board, because they are just trying to get through the day. You know, they're trying to survive. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you one more thing on that then. So do you, when you see certain behavior in terms of marketing and thought leadership online, does it ever give you kind of rules or ways of thinking, this is how I want to push back against that and do it differently?
I think more it gives me conviction that I am showing up in a way that is meaningful, intentional, and, you know, is genuinely creating value in the world. So I think, you know, for example, there maybe have things I would do in the past where I would think, you know, I don't want to talk about this too, don't want to talk about my course too much. What if I annoy people? You know, that classic, the marketeer's dilemma. I think when I see that stuff, I think, you know, it's absolutely okay for me to show up and say, like, this is who I am and this is what I can offer you. This is my, you know, 10 years plus CV and skill set that gives me the qualifications and the credibility to do this work. And it makes me, it shows me that the need and the demand for my work is probably even bigger than I realised, because now I'm getting a lot of people joining my community because they're saying I couldn't find one that wasn't banging on about star signs. Because, you know, it really is becoming such a hot topic. And, you know, I've asked a bunch of my friends who are practicing scientists, like, can you come on my Instagram live and just help me do a quick explainer? And they're like, mate, no, because what would I do an Instagram live about the earth not being flat? No, like, we're way beyond, like, we're putting people on Mars. Like, this is not up for debate. And I think it's so interesting, the distance between that and sure, you know, the algorithm and the bubbles mean that you're seeing the same messages all the time of, you know, Mercury's going into retrograde, so, like, make sure you have this chat with your boss and make sure you do this with your money this week. And it's just like, no thank you. So harmful.
Honestly, I feel like I could talk to you all day, and there's even things on my list that we haven't talked about. So maybe we'll get you back on we'll get you back on another time and pick up some of these different threads of conversation. But yeah, just super inspiring, and I love your sense of purpose and your sense of mission and everything you do. So just before we finish, just tell people where they can find out more, connect with you, and share lots of stuff online that is not hippie woo woo.
Yes. So I'm Lauren Currie on Instagram and Twitter. Super active on Instagram, share posts most days around a lot of the things that Graham and I have talked about. My website is laurencurrie.co. UpFront is weareupfront.com. And the next bond starts on the 7th of June. We still have lots of places left. So if you're even the tiniest bit curious, do get in touch. Check out the website. I would love to welcome you. And thank you so much for listening.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, Graham. Thank you.
This video is sponsored by Think Productive, home of the Productivity Ninja. We help people and organizations to increase their impact and make space for what matters through a range of workshops, programs, and coaching. Head to thinkproductive.com to find out more. Are you interested in booking me as a speaker for your event? You want to sign up for my Rev Up for the Week email? Do you want to buy some of my books? Or do you just want to find out what I'm doing right now? It's all at grahamallcott.com/links. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share so we can make more. Thanks for watching.